What's up? I'm Dwayne Rambo, and this is Home Improvement.
Home Improvement.
Okay, for this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a staggered staple fused Clapton, also known as an SSFC. It was created by a fellow named squidoode on Instagram. He's an OG builder. I think he came out with this one around 2015. I'll drop a link down below in his tutorial, and he'll explain the evolution of staggered builds and how it got to the point where he created the staggered staple. So let's move on to the build. Okay, so we're going to be using Coil Society 28 gauge Nichrome 80, Coil Society 38 gauge Nichrome 80, and most importantly, we're going to be using Coil Society ribbon wire. This is 0.3 Nichrome 80. And why I say most importantly is because you want to make sure that you have ribbon wire from a company like Coil Society or Kidney Puncher that gives you ribbon straight when it comes off the spool. That is going to make this so much easier. If you have other cheaper ribbon wire that you got to stretch it out, chances are it's also filthy. So, and when you got to stretch these ribbon wires out and fold them together, or just however you're going to stack them together, it's going to introduce a whole other realm of problems. So do yourself a favor, order from Coil Society or order from Kidney Puncher. These are the two companies that I know that offer ribbon wire like that, and I can vouch for them because I've used so much wire from both companies. And anyways, let's move on to this build. Let's start setting up this prep. Let's get into the stagger. So first we're going to figure out about how much wire we're going to need to prep here. So we're going to need one staggered strip coming out of here. We're going to make enough on that staggered frame so it can be cut in half and used as both sides of both frames. So we're going to figure out in our heads what type of coil we're going to do. For me, I'm going to be building this for a parallel mech, and I'm going to be thinking somewhere around 4 wraps. So 6 inches should be enough, and 6 times 2, because you need 2 frames, 12 inches, and then give yourself a little bit of play. If you lose a little in the beginning where you connect to the drill. So we want to make sure after we have 6 inches on one side, 6 on the other, that's 12 inches, and a little bit extra on both sides for prep. So I'll do 14 or 15 inches, give or take. Sometimes your stagger don't start out perfectly clean, and you just lose a little bit of wire, so add a little bit when you're doing this. So for 4 wraps, 6 inches is going to be enough. I'm going to do a little bit extra, so this way I have enough to take a photo of a little tiny stick for the thumbnail of this video. So we're going to be shooting for a 7-inch stick here, so needing 7 inches on both sides, and leaving extra room, we're going to go with about 16 inches just to be safe. And I measure everything out the way I like to do things. Cut this crappy piece off right there. You can leave it on, but it just drives me nuts even looking at it. So all right, so let's get it hooked up. I really like using a 1/4 inch impact chuck adapter. It closes up to the center here, absolutely perfect. I know that the way I have this lens focused, I can't push this thing right up to you guys and show you, but this chuck nose closes all the way down. So I'm gonna stick this 28 gauge right in there. I'm not gonna bend the lead or nothing. I just stick it right into the center, and if you get it centered in there, that's it. That's all you need. You don't need to bend the lead, and it'll spin nice and centered for you. So I'll be honest, I really don't use my chuck, the drill chuck, anymore. For this build I will, because I don't expect people to go out and go buying tools, impact adapters, or a flat chuck, because if I'm not using this, I'm using some sort of a flat chuck. I've got one for my mini bead lathe, and I use this modified. It's a jeweler's vise, modified for a drill, and it's a different way of doing the prep for that. I will be showing you that. You will see that, not in this video. It will be in one of the upcoming videos, and I do that with more advanced builds. And you can also do this build that way as well. So that's it. That's all you got to do. Now we're gonna wanna make sure that this wire is straight. I know I gave it a little bit of a stretch, but when we take this off, we don't want these to have that little bow in those. So stretching it is not always the best way. Some people only do that and they don't spin with the drill. If you spin this the wrong way, it can be a little bit of a problem because your stagger, when you put your stagger on, we're gonna let it go loose. So if this is all twisted up, if you look at this on a microscopic level, you'll see the twisted grooves that are in the wire. And in my opinion, I think that can be a little bit obstructive for the stagger wire to be able to slide on the core wire. Same thing if you're using really cheap wire from somewhere, and you notice that your hands are getting them black streaks on it for dealing with your wire. Coil Society wire is clean, kidney puncher as well. Kidney puncher is like wire that fell from the heavens, but there's a price that comes with that. But anyways, if you got gunk on your wires, make sure you clean that right now. This is the time where, you know, grab maybe an alcohol pad or something and wipe it down. The alcohol will evaporate. So, you know, get that nice and clean. We don't want nothing causing the stagger to get stuck on the core wire. So also no kinks, no anomalies whatsoever here. We want this nice and smooth because we're going to be expecting the staggered wire to slide on there. So, okay, to stagger, there's a lot of ways to do it, a lot of ways. My preferred way of doing it is with a little small clamp. These are Craftsman, and in my opinion, of all the clamps that I've used, and I've used quite a bit, I buy any of them. If I see any kind of brand, I buy it. And Craftsman has the best pad for the job. So, and what I mean by that is inside the groove here, if you can see inside this groove here, there's only a vertical slot that's cut into there. I don't know why they do that, but anyways, other companies will put an X in here so they have a vertical slot too. And what that does is your wire will seat inside of there, and I noticed it can cause problems sometimes. It's not quite as consistent. And if you do get one of those with the pads on there, you can put something on these, you know. I've seen other people use masking tape. Don't use this tape, not this one. I've seen people use the blue and the green, I think, and they've put them on their pads. So maybe that would work, but just pay attention if you do something like that, because if the wire digs into the tape, you're gonna get the glue will get gunked up and wrapped up into your stagger or your Clapton on your core wire, and just makes a mess. And I don't even chance it at that point. That happened to me once, and that was the last time I tried doing something like that. So, but anyways, if I'm not doing a stagger with this, I'm doing a stagger with the bigger mini. It's a mini cloth pin, but it's the bigger version of it. And why I say the bigger version, because this thing does look tiny, is there's smaller ones. So, and here's where the story goes. I started using this to parallel fuse over ribbon wire, and I was just putting it up on the nose and parallel the wire over ribbon and fusing it, and it works great. I'll show you guys that in another video. But anyways, Richie Oliver's seen me doing that, and he must have just had these little tiny guys, and look how small the nose is in comparison. You know, so it's there's quite a difference. You're not going to stick this up there on the nose. So he stuck his up on sideways like this, and does the build that way. So I'm going to show you if I can do it his way. I'm going to show you that way. And then the same thing with this bigger one, you can just stick it up like this on there and lock it on. But we're gonna be using the clamp today because that's what I find the best. And the reason why I say I find the clamp the best is because every other method that you do this, you really wanna make sure that you're on top of this fuse wire on a 90. There's really, you got a little bit of wiggle room for error, but if you're off a little, you're gonna influence the stagger to open itself up or whatever. You want to make sure you're, you know, following it on the 90 or a little bit ahead of it, and that's it. With this, when it's on there, I could take the spool and drop it on something to let it spin over here and put a clamp on the drill, and I can just watch the wire come through the clamp and make, if I want to make a 10-foot piece, I can make a 10-foot piece and just completely automate it and sit back and have a vape. There's less room for error on this, but this bites directly down on top of right on top of the loop that I'm going to tie on here. So that's the difference between different peg methods that they'll, you know, whatever they're using to stagger and lock on that loop. So I did a recording, and for the example of it, I have a gold or pinkish gold wire and a green wire. And so these are probably like 28 gauge. And I wrapped these up on a 20 gauge cord and recorded it to show you how I'm applying the loop onto the core wire that's going to create the spacing for the stagger. And that's going to give you a consistent way of doing it. And you know, if you get this part done right, you make the rest of this build much easier. If you don't get this stagger done exactly right, you're going to be fighting this build, possibly leading yourself into a failure. So let's get down in real close here, and I'm going to explain to you with the close-up with the colored wires how to apply the loop best way that I know how to do it for consistency.
So we're just going to start out Claptoning like normal. So for the beginning of this, we're just going to start out like we're doing a regular Clapton. We're going to get it far enough away from the drill chuck so that way we can apply whatever type of peg we're going to put on there, the cloth pin or a clamp or whatever it is. We get out far enough and then we start spacing. So we just lead the wire out a little bit more. We don't need to do a whole lot. It doesn't need to be drastic. So now we're going to take that lead of wire that we had and we're going to start wrapping it. I wrapped over the top when I did my Clapton, and when I come back to the far side of this, I'm wrapping over the top again. And I wrap over that wire back into it. And I do this 2 times. You could do it 3 times. You can do just 1 loop, but you risk the chances of the inconsistencies. When you do it this way, you're going to lock everything into place, and there's very little chance. Take your thumbnail, put it up against the core wire, and smash it all forward. Don't go too crazy with it. You know, just be a little delicate with it, but push it all together. Now you got your loop in place. That's going to create your stagger. So now that we got the clamp, we're going to go right over the core wire, right over the loop that we applied. We're going to clamp right down on top of it. So I'm going to hold the clamp because this is on 20 gauge with 28 gauge or something wire, just for the example. So the clamp needs to kind of be held. It's fighting me right now, but with regular wire, you're not going to experience these issues. It's just going to start taking off for you. That clamp's going to start moving. All you got to do is just make sure everything's nice and centered, and it's not wobbling like a maniac, and you can just run it full throttle all the way down to the end. So, as you can see, nice and staggered, perfectly and consistent. That's the way we want it, nice and consistent.
So now that you've seen that, we're going to go ahead and do that with the 38 gauge. So I'm going to start the Clapton. I have this is probably a 10-inch piece. That's way longer than I need. However, you know, we're going to be up here with this, wrapping this around, coming around this way and wrapping it around, locking it into our Clapton wire that's on the core wire already. So we want to make sure that we have enough to reach around and keep going around and get this locked into place where it needs to be. Again, this step is very critical. We got to make sure that we get this stagger done correctly, and it makes this build 100% easier. So let's go ahead and get the Clapton started. We're just going to Clapton on maybe about a little bit more than 1/2 inch, and then we're going to start spacing a little bit like you've seen in the video that we were just talking about, and we're going to go ahead and get that loop wrapped up in there. So now we got enough space out here. We don't want to get too close to here. We're not going to be able to apply any kind of tools if we're too close to the drill chuck. So this is what I'm doing now, is just doing a regular Clapton to get far enough away from it. And now I'm going to start spacing a little bit. Now, if you want, you can pick yourself up a set of magnifying headset. I picked these up from Amazon. They got a little light on them. I don't even know if the light works anymore. It don't. But these have a micro USB charger on them, and you get 5 different clips. This is the strongest one, and this is what I use. I don't even use the other ones. But to be able to look at your prep work when you're doing it, these work pretty good. and be able to watch yourself space it. It looks pretty good. I really don't need to do it with these on, but we're just gonna take a look at it and do it because for the hell of it. So now we're gonna be leaving the spool down, and we don't wanna knock it over, and if we can do something to help it not happen, it's usually always smart. So these big scissors I use to cut wire have a big slot, okay? And so I just stick the spool in there, and it's a lot less to worry about, especially because I buy 1,000-foot spools. When it hits the floor, you know, I'm just praying to God that all didn't poof off. So now we got that wire in, and in the video you watched me do it up close. So I'm gonna intentionally not get a macro view of this from far away and just let you guys watch me do it from a distance now. And keep in mind in that video what you watched, and then now you're gonna see it from back there. This is the part where I would use my headset. So I'm just gonna leave about 4 inches down on my side of it, and I'm gonna come behind this on the swivel side here, like I said in the video, of the last piece of Clapton, and then I'm gonna wrap around that wire. One wrap, 2 wraps, and that looks like it's perfectly tight, but to be safe, I'll take my thumbnail and just slightly snug it over. Don't go maniac and start pushing up on there, because these wires are parallel. If you smush them, sometimes one will have the tendency to buckle underneath the other ones, and then it won't give you a consistent stagger. It'll be smaller because your wire buckled a little bit. So now here is where you can use the bigger cloth pin, and you push it right up, you slide it up your loop wire all the way up to the cord where it stops. And that's it. And then you would start fusing. And so that worked perfect. I'm gonna show you with the smaller one, when Richie see me doing this over ribbon wire. Richie's also Proby300 on Instagram, if you don't know his name, Richie Oliver. When he see me doing this over ribbon wire, pegging it on there, and he must have just had these little guys, so he just clamped on over that whole loop assembly this way, and it locked on the same way. Anything that's really gonna peg onto it is gonna get it going. So instead of doing that with the little guy here, I'm pretty sure that explanation should have explained it enough. I'm just gonna swap over, and hopefully I don't mess this up when I do the swap. And I'm gonna pop the clamp on and show you how this one actually goes directly right over the core wire, right into the middle of the pads. I'm just gonna lock it directly right over the top of everything. And at that point, I really don't even gotta pay a whole lot of attention. I don't need to follow it or anything. I mean, kind of want to be within the vicinity of it, obviously, but I mean, you know, it's almost foolproof once you get it set on there. So generally you want to start out slow with your drill when you have something pegged. For the most part, with the clamp on like this, it don't make a huge difference. You can just start out faster. But any other way that I've done it with other stuff, pegging onto it and locking it in place, it can cause a little minor screw up there, and it'll fix itself right away again. But then you had that fuck up that's there, and you know, there's no fixing that. So hopefully that don't happen when I do this right now, because I probably should have went to the middle where I'm going to be cutting it and made the change again there, which would have been very smart, but I didn't think about that, so here we are. It worked out good. So I never fuse these all the way down to the end. I always leave a little bit extra on the end. That's what I was talking about when I was measuring how much core wire I was gonna measure out. I always give myself extra on both ends. So. Sometimes I try to unwrap the loop that's in there because I'm concerned that it might cause the stagger to hang up when it loosens, when it's trying to move over on the final fuse. But the loop right now, it just kind of popped out. It stayed back here. When I cut this retracted in. That's what happens, and we want this loose. So because the wire opened up and left a microscopic gap between the wire and the core wire, it needs more length, so therefore it takes it from the end as it springs open, and it retracts. However, when we're going back in with the final fuse, this is going to slowly open back up to where we cut it, like, see how it closed in, but it needs to open back up again. So on both sides of these frames, when we're fusing in, it's going to be coming off of the wire. And this is why it's critical to make sure that our stagger cuts. When we cut the stagger anywhere, it's critical to make sure that we use something extremely sharp. My humble opinion, just use scissors. I use scissors to cut 98% of all the wire that I cut. Coil sticks, everything. I use scissors. Flush cutters go dull fast. They're a specialty tool. And I only use them when I absolutely need them. So, and in this circumstance here, if you don't get that clean cut, it's going to leave the core wire mushroomed out, and the stagger wire is not going to push over it to slide off. What's going to happen when you're fusing this wire is it's not going to, you're going to get so far in, everything's going to be nice and smooth and going good. And when this wire needs to start compressing back open and it starts scrunching up where you're fusing here, it's just not going to fall together for you anymore. You're going to start zigzagging and skipping, and it's just going to give you hell. So make sure that when you cut this staggered wire, you cut it with something very sharp. Scissors can even be sharpened. I've sharpened these probably about 4 times already. So, all right, so with that being said, let's loosen the stagger on this. So I'm gonna hold the end where I cut it. I'm gonna put this thing in reverse, and I'm gonna loosen it for about 3 seconds. So, and you need to make sure that it's loose. Like, we're gonna be able to, if we wanted to, we can completely just decore this, just like as if you were making an alien. This is loose on both sides. So that loosens this up nice and loose because this thing has to scoot over, so it needs to be loose. Now when we take this off, we're gonna put this aside where it's not gonna be touched. This cannot be disturbed at all whatsoever. You gotta be very, very delicate with it, and set it to the side while you're setting up your ribbon wire, setting up your core wire. All right, so now we're gonna set up our core. Really haven't decided how many I'm gonna use. Thinking maybe like 10 or something. So let's take off, let's do a 10 ply with it. And then it's going on a triple parallel mech anyway. So let's do a 10 ply, and we're gonna do 16-inch pieces that are gonna be folded into 8 inches. So I can just grab it from the middle. I know right where the middle is, and swoop it right out like a little mini cup. Now I got it right from the middle. And because this builds for me, I'm gonna use saliva. Saliva works great. Just don't do that when you're giving it to other people. But saliva works great. It's a little stickier than just water. But for me, look, one wipe. That's Coil Society wire right there. Look at that. That was just one wipe. And I'm gonna keep going just to make sure I got it all pushed together. But I mean, that's 10 ply. That's 10 ribbon. It ain't gonna stick like that. So do yourself a favor and make sure that you buy straight ribbon. Coil Society or Kidney Country, my 2 recommendations. I'm gonna use some 40 gauge to bind it up, and what I normally do is, you can see that, maybe you can't see, but when I start running low on my 40 gauge spools, they turn into binder spools. These are just for binders now. I won't use this for anything else because of the fear of running out of wire in the middle of the project. So I just clip off what I need to clip off these days with this until it's gone. And this will probably last me another probably year. As much as I've been building lately, probably 2 years. Then you're gonna need a little bit extra binder for other parts of the project here. So make sure you cut off enough for other bindings. I like to use the nylon pliers. It gets everything together, holds all the ribbon flat together. It smushes down your binder. Just cleans everything up, nice and clean. So we still got plenty to work with. I'm gonna come down here and find the shortest piece of the ribbon wire. Cut that right over your garbage can, so all them pieces, that's 10 pieces or 9 pieces pretty much, that's a ribbon wire that could go flying around or get stuck in your foot or just something stupid. So just do all them little cuts over a garbage can. Always have a nice little garbage can sitting to your side and cut all your wire right over it. That way it goes down into the garbage can. So now we're gonna use a little bit of hot glue. You really don't have to if you don't have it, but I recommend going and getting some. It helps hold things together. The better you get, if you're not inclined to using hot glue, I don't always use it on things, but if you're watching this video, that means you're learning how to do it, or you've been failing and fed up with it and came here looking for another answer to what's going on, what are you doing wrong. So let's add this in for the extra security. And I like using a torch. I've been using that for so long, these little mini torches. They don't overheat the glue, so the glue don't go dripping everywhere. And for whatever reason, it's more accurate on the burn. So put a little bit of glue on, hit it again. That does is it kind of just, the glue gets sucked up into the ribbon. If you want to dry the ribbon off as fast as possible, take a big vape and blow it on the glue. The vape is cold, it'll dry off to harden the glue faster. So now that we know that's glued, let's put another little slider on. Not much, we don't want to put much on because we don't want this getting in the way of the frames laying on the side. But we want this ribbon to be locked together. So when I add another one on to ribbon like this, I try to do it up close to the bind because the wire is not as flimsy, it's stronger up here. So I'll add that second one up here. If you try doing that down lower, you're gonna start bending your stack of ribbon. And we can just hook it up to the swivel just for something to hold it. And we're gonna slide that piece of ribbon all the way down to the bottom. So this slider now is holding all of this together absolutely perfectly on the end, and that's the sole purpose for adding this on. That's just holding it on the other end. Now I can apply a tiny, tiny bit of hot glue here. And then we're gonna hit it again so it all sinks down in there. We don't want a blob, we don't want a bunch of glue down here. We want to be able to do that afterwards when we add the frames on. This is the very, very smallest amount of glue we're putting on there. We pretty much don't even want to see it. Now I'm heating it so it's going to soak up into the all into the nice grooves and crevices, and it's going to lock this stack together. So you can do whatever you want with this extra slider. Bring it all the way up to the end. Let's get that other tag end off of there though. Keep this build nice and clean. And it was only on the swivel to hold the other end of it while I did that. Now we have a stack of ribbon that is locked in place. You know, a lot of times when people are doing this, and even when I first started doing this, I think my first staggered staple was about 4 years ago. And my problem was I didn't have the ribbon prepped securely enough, and the ribbon was rolling inside. And so knowing how to take these extra steps that I just did and the extra prep is further improves my success later in the final procedure here. So now we're gonna need to take the staggered frame very delicately, and we're gonna measure it and cut it in half. So I cut it in half. Now here, without moving any of these, I just cut it in half and it's laying down. And now here's the thing about your frames. You don't want to rotate them like as if you were bending it in half, because now you have a stagger that's leaning this way as you're fusing it, but then when it busts the U-turn, now that stagger is leaning this way, the opposite way. Now, I'm not saying that you can't fuse into that. I'm not saying that it won't work. But I'm going to show you an example of a photo that I took 20 times macro on a crop sensor that puts it, I think, about 30 times magnification. And you're going to see how this 40 gauge fused staggered over the 29 gauge frames leans on an angle. This is 40 gauge fused on top of 29 gauge. So you see what I'm talking about? Like, that's 30 times magnification. What we're going to do here is I'm gonna take the back half that I cut, and without anything else, I'm just gonna pick it up and move it forward, up next to this other one. Without rotating it or nothing, or just when you cut it, and just move it on up. I'm gonna take the ribbon wire, put it in the middle. I'm gonna cut off the bare wire and the swivel side that I had on here. So now we have a frame on each side of the stack of ribbon that I just put. I'm going to show you in up close how this looks, but first let's bind it all up and then we'll get down into it and I'll show you that prep, how it looks before I mount it up onto the drill and swivel. Again, that's why I said with the 40 gauge, take enough off, we're going to need more later. So if glue gets in your way, you can always just reheat it. If something seems to have slipped out of space, or if it seems like it's causing the ribbon wire to curl and crunch or anything, just hit it with the heat for a second, and it unlocks that glue temporarily until it hardens back up again, which is pretty awesome about using hot glue in comparison. Like if it was something like super glue or something, you wouldn't have that option. So I just got my nail pushed down onto both of these sides. Got my nail pushed down, locking it in place. I'm gonna give it a nice little smash. Cleans everything up. So that's locked in place. Now we're gonna use a little bit of hot glue again. We're gonna have both of these assuring that the binder and the hot glue assuring that these stay put the way they are. Some of these steps that you can skip, you don't need to do all of this. If you feel you've gotten to the point where you don't need to do the whole shebang, yeah, it's not mandatory. You just got to get pretty good at the craft and get a nice light touch. It's all about that finesse, baby. Okay, so you're probably wondering what was that you had on the core. All it was two little small clippings, 2 little small clippings from a straw. You can use more. You can even slit these so you can take them on and off. I'm gonna go ahead and just slit these. I normally don't do my staggereds this way. I do them with a flat chuck and I reverse the ribbon so my frame has extra spare space to slide this over to. With this way, I probably would just recommend slicing these down the middle so you can remove them when you get down towards the other end. And what this does, it allows your staggered frame to have nothing biting down on it and preventing that staggered fuse wire from scooting over. What we're doing is a slight force fuse. Because when we let this stagger go loose, it retracted. Things got, the gaps got a little bit smaller, and when we fill them in, it's going to expand again. And they need to be able to move over. And so if you go biting down on them with anything, at one point or another, the stagger is gonna start scrunching back up into almost basically a Clapton, and you're not gonna have the spacing to fuse into it. You're gonna start crisscrossing. It's gonna turn into an uphill battle, and save yourself from that trouble. So you can also, if you want, take a 2.5 millimeter jig bit or a 3 millimeter jig bit even, and wrap some 24 gauge on there, make a coil, and cut the legs off entirely. If you don't have a straw in the house, Richie Oliver, Proby 300 on Instagram, taught me that. I learned quite a bit from that guy. But anyways, now we got these back on, and what they're gonna do is they're gonna serve as almost like a contactless binder that's gonna hold, instead of putting, you know, clips, cloth pins or hair clips or whatever it is that you put on your cords to keep, you know, to keep it all together in parallel. We can't do that. So now, you know, some people may take a clip and put it down on the end here, but if you don't take that off somewhere down towards the first third, you know, after the third of the stick, I feel like you're just gonna have problems. You'll start zigzagging and stuff. If you got a nice, perfectly loose stagger, we should be able to just run through this fuse without having to zigzag anything. Everything's just gonna move over for us and cooperate with us, and nothing's gonna stop that. We got clean cuts on the end of our fuses, so when we're done here, we're gonna have staggered wire pushed off of these core wires where we cut it. And we're gonna depend on that core wire being cut clean enough so that stagger can push off, or we're gonna have the same kind of problems. We're gonna be swinging back and forth, you know, every time we rotate, you know, forward, backwards, forward, backwards. You know, it just gets tedious. Sometimes it happens and I just go with it, and if it's just too bad, I'll just scrap the build and start over again, because I know if I did it right, I can do it all over again and be done faster than if I was sitting there fighting such a tedious build. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and mount this up and get the fuse in it. You could even lightly bend 90s on your frames over here, so it has, you know, the legs can stick out and get locked in on your drill chuck. I personally feel like that is it's asking for trouble with your stagger, because you're messing around with it a little bit too much, and the more you play with the staggered frame and contact on that period, no matter how, the more likelihood you're gonna mess up that stagger. So hopefully I have enough glue on here right now to stick it into the drill chuck. If not, I may add a little bit more, and we're not gonna pull back on this tight. The thing is, when you're using hot glue in a drill chuck, is you're pulling back on it, you're gonna yank it up out of the drill. So these are a lot of the reasons why I don't prep this way anymore, and I use other special tools to do things like I showed you previously in the video. However, we don't have that right now, and I'm assuming that the majority of people just don't have that, and we're gonna do it this way so you can build this build now. As we get more into the advanced builds on this channel, I will be showing with the other tools, and I will be showing you the tools, where to get the tools, and how I use them. So that's enough talking about that. Let's just try to get this into the drill chuck. It's been so long since I've used a drill chuck. So don't go biting down too much, and pay close attention. Look down in here. Looks like we're pretty good in there. They bit down in. And what I did was I stuck it down on the three teeth that come out and stick out. I took the stick flat, and I rested it down on the one tooth. And when it all came down tight and bit down onto it. So we'll show you a close-up of that. Okay, so if you go crunching down too much on the ribbon wire when it's set up like this, you can disrupt it. And as you've seen a little bit there, it's slightly disrupted it, and I think, you know, the first wrap into the stick, I can just pinch down on it and fix that. But if I would have kept cranking down on that bad boy, I probably would have had a little bit more issues. So now we're just gonna push this up to our swivel. So this is why, when you look at my build setup here, I've got the low profile 4-inch vices set up on both sides. This side I can clamp down on with a nice big clamp to lock it in. Same thing I can do on the other vise as well, to lock the drill in. They're nice and heavy, they don't move as easy, but I really like having a tensioner knob here. What that does is it'll slide this swivel back and forth on this body, the tension adjuster. And so when these things are locked in, when these things are set in place, I don't need to do a whole lot of pulling or anything. I lock the tension exactly the way I want it back here, and I know that we're safe. At that point, when I'm using this trigger, I'm not looking at trying to apply tension, a good proper tension and speed at the same time. I've taken that out of the equation and locked it down with this type of setup just like this. I love this type of setup. Now, we all build differently, I understand that, and I also told you I wasn't gonna talk about crazier tools, but this is what I use. I probably could have just used a basic swivel setup and mounted it on something that's basic, but you know, the point of this whole thing here is the fact that we don't wanna be pulling back on this and having crazy tension. We wanna be relaxed when we do this. Same thing when we're holding the spool wire. We don't wanna be pulling down towards bowing this core wire and jacking everything up. We want to make sure that we get it fused tight, yes. But we don't want to be we want to be thinking finesse throughout this whole rest of this process. In our head, you know, finesse, spin, 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 maybe five spins, 10 spins, and pinch, pinch, pinch. We're going to do a lot of pinching all the way down. That's what's going to keep these frames, in place. That's what's going to hold everything together, is us pinching this as we're fusing it. We're going to fuse a little bit, pinch, fuse a little bit, pinch, fuse a little bit, pinch, all the way down through the process. In the beginning, this is going to take you a long time to do. As you get better and better, you'll be able to fly through a build like this without thinking a whole lot about it. Once you can do a build like this, you've opened up the doors to so many other more advanced variants of this build. It's unlimited, the possibilities of what you can do. So once you can do this one, congratulations, you've stepped up to the next level. So without any more chatter, let's get to fusing. A lot of times people ask, how do you actually see the build? And I'm gonna be honest, I'm pretty blind. And what you do here is you can grab an older phone. This is an iPhone 6 with a macro clip on there, and you can set that up on a selfie stick. I've got an aftermarket clip on the top because the ones that come on selfie sticks break a lot. I picked that up on Amazon. And this is just a little swivel vise where I can adjust it down here and move this thing around wherever I want. And then I can bring my selfie stick right over the build. Just a lock down onto the table, wherever you want to put it. And you drop your phone and macro over the build and you build it. So that's one way of seeing it. If you don't want to go and pick this type of stuff up or improvise with what you have to achieve the same type of concept, get yourself a little tabletop lamp. I picked this up from Walmart in the United States. It's a flexible gooseneck Walmart lamp, and I put inside of it, I have 3 of these. I put inside of it a powerful LED bulb. It's 1680 lumens, 5K daylight spectrum. And for the video, I put a piece of paper over it to diffuse it so it doesn't cause so much lens flare like you're just seeing right now. But I put these over my build. I put one here, and I watch a lot of reflection. I can come down in, and this is well lit now with the combination of the magnifying headset. You can actually see pretty well. When you build with the phone setup like this, the newer phones are a little tricky. I have the Note 20 now. I'll have to keep testing and messing around with it because I've always just used this phone. It was just time to upgrade. So I got the Note 20, but I have no problems using these older phones, and if you can just pick up an older iPhone 6 Plus, 6S Plus, you know, for pretty cheap from somebody, or if you have one laying around, now you can repurpose it, use it for building. So for the purposes of the video, I'm gonna set this up, and I'll also be able to record and show you what I'm looking at. Now, the cool thing about building with this, there's pros and cons to it. The cool thing about it is I could sit back, I'm not straining over it, straining my eyes trying to look, and I'm hunched over it the whole time. I could pretty much sit back while I got my phone in front of me right here and just keep moving this thing along and building and relaxed, just stay nice and relaxed and build. Or, you know, and this really comes into play with things like pitchforks and stuff. You can really see what you're doing at the 10 times macro clip-on that I have there. And but the con to it is making sure that you're staying in focus, making sure you've got some sort of additional lighting right here so you can see it, and, you know, moving this thing around, it can be a pain in the butt. Another con would be, you know, having a phone, you know, that you use specifically for this, like I do. You know, you put in macro clips on over phones with big OtterBox cases and stuff to protect your expensive phones. Makes it difficult to put a phone clip on. I get that as well. So again, you can even just use, you know, a couple of these and a nice headset. If you look at this one here on Amazon, it was like 25 bucks. Nick Devine uses one that even gets down even closer. I plan on picking that one up and checking that out. But he looks out just with one eye because that thing really has a magnification in there. But again, you're looking through one eye, squinting, trying to get that thing in there, leaning, hunched over, nice and close to the build. That's a lot of strain. So there's a lot of ways to get it done. There's a lot of ways to see it. These are a few other additional options, and I hope that helps. So let's get down in nice and close here and show you what it looks like when I'm building this. But an up-close personal look of actually what I look at when I'm building. And also at the same time, it's just gonna bring you in closer and show you. There's one thing you wanna make sure that when you start this, you start on a 90. So that's the biggest thing to get yourself started. When you get going, if you notice that you can't just hold it into place and keep spinning the drill, switch your angle, make sure you get it right. So it could take a little bit of messing up the stagger in the beginning, but once you get this down on the 90 that it belongs on, so the wire's coming straight up, maybe just a little bit more forward, just slightly, then for the rest of it should go nice and smooth. The very beginning of this is the most important part. So you're gonna do a little bit of extra pinching in the beginning. And you notice my spool hand really hasn't moved a whole lot. So don't think in your head that you're gonna be dragging your hand fast when you're doing this. This is a slow process. So you're pretty much keeping that hand parked. And as you're watching the angle, you're slowly moving it. It almost doesn't feel like you're moving at all, but you're just watching reflection. This light that I have here is shining, and I can see this, and whether I can't see that wire the greatest, but I see a nice shiny blinky streak over here, and I know that's the wire, and I can definitely tell where it is, and I can watch the pattern on the stick that's also reflecting and shining back at me. So these are tricks to seeing your build, and when you start getting into this type of stuff and using 38 gauge and 40 gauge and 42 gauge and 44 gauge, and you know, these guys are even using 46 gauge now, and I mean, I've got 54 gauge, but I'm talking about, you know, realistically doing staggered builds with 46 gauge and staggertons with 46 gauge. How are we going to see these things? There's going to be different ways, different methods, different tricks, and so all that type of information is good to throw in while we're talking about this right here. This is the beginning of all that madness we were just talking about. So you get past this, this is something that you're going to want to know, these other things that I'm explaining to you. So let's get back to fusing. You want to pinch from the top. Don't try coming up from the bottom. Come from the top of your build away from the opposite side of where your wire is coming from. If you're building on the table and your wire is coming this way, pinch in from the other side, on the opposite side of where your fuse wire is feeding in from. And you seen how I stopped and went right back where I was, and I didn't mess up at all? It's because my fuse wire is staying parked. I'm not moving that thing. That needs to stay exactly where it is. When I stop to do my pinching, I use my drill hand. That's critical. Don't set your spool down. Don't change anything with your spool hand. You want that staying right where it is. Don't let go of the spool. Don't let go of anything down there. Just, you know, slowly snail trail it. Just slowly move it. And again, remember finesse. We think about finesse when we're doing this build. Don't be yanking back hard. Don't be holding on your spool hard. You know. These are the weights that come with a scale that we mix e-liquid with. It's the most commonly used scale, the LB501. So you can use pretty much anything metal that's round. If you got a mech mod that doesn't have a bunch of designs on it, that's an old useless one laying around, use that. Put that on something hard. Normally I bring this build into the kitchen on the hard countertop in the kitchen, and I'll roll over it with this. But for the video's sake, we're gonna use the vise. I pulled my swivel assembly out of it, and we got a little bit of solid ground to work with right here. So that's what we're gonna do. Now is the time where you pay close inspection. Which side is the absolute cleanest, flawless, especially if you're into taking your macro photography of your builds. You wanna have your cleanest side on the outside of your coil. So let's take a nice close look at this and determine which side we're gonna use and roll over it. When we roll over this is gonna clean it up. I mean, I can just go ahead and wrap it like this right now, and most people aren't even gonna be able to tell the difference. But I'm a perfectionist when it comes to building. I try to do the best that I can and make things look as clean as they can. And rolling over it is that one extra step that you take to excellency. So let's take a look at what side's gonna be the best side here and get to rolling over this build. So it's really nice having the macro clip on the phone. It helps you look at things that when you're setting up a binary or you're setting up any type of a build and you really need to take a good close look at it, it's good having that there. And for me, I would never sell the old phone. It just, for me, it's a coil building tool now. I use that for coil building. It's dedicated to the build station. And now I know that I have my clean side that I want, and we're gonna go ahead and start rolling over it. I'm gonna clip the glue end off so it's just nice and flush. So the part that went into the drill chuck is now removed. And we're not gonna go maniac on this. And there's some builds, like binary builds, that if you roll over them too hard, or some corrugated builds, you roll over them too hard, you'll put little kinks in the wire. So pay attention to what build you do this with. But for most staggered builds, yeah, you wanna roll over them. Some of them you just roll over ever so lightly. Something like this, you can put a little more pressure on it, but just don't go maniac with it. So. And now I know the side I rolled over because it's bowed a little bit like this. I know that the inside of the curve is the clean side that I rolled over. So when I go coiling this, I don't need to try and remember the stick is gonna be the indication of the form of how it is. It bends like a banana, and the inside of the banana is the outside of the coil. Let's get down up into this up close and take a good look at this while I wrap it into a coil. You can watch how I wrap it into a coil, and we're gonna do the install, pulse some colors, wick it up, juice it up, and come back up here and vape it and talk about it. All right, so this build clocks in at 0.07. It was initially that was intended to be built for the triple parallel. Be sure to know your Ohm's law if you're going to vape this low resistance. These are true 30 amp cells. A nice little angry vape. I love 4 wraps. For me, if you're running 4 volts, you want to run 4 wraps on these bigger, fatter coils, in my opinion. It is subjective, but I like 4 wraps. It's just that ramp up. It's there all day. Now this has 38 gauge on it. I normally like to have this with 40 gauge. It'd ramp up even a little bit better. So let's have a vape and talk about it. So Staggered staple fuse Claptons, in my opinion, the presentation of the coil, the configuration of the coil, I should say, it just does something better for fruit flavors. So this build is all in 80, and normally in 80 shines on bakeries and desserts and pastries, that kind of thing, and it does good with fruits as well. But this presentation, this configuration of coil seems to do very good with fruity notes. Whatever it is, I don't know. I don't think there's no science to it, but you know, this presentation does very well. So if you're looking for something to push fruity notes and you like using nichrome 80 over stainless steel, this would be the presentation that you're going to look for. It does very well. This is a strawberry cream, like a unicorn milk that I mixed up that I put in here. Tasting very good out of this RDA. You'll be seeing a review on this RDA coming up soon. This is the Purge X RDA, and make sure you like this video, subscribe, comment. All the extra help on this video pushes it out there. YouTube sees it, sees that people like the video, shows it to other people. Until next time, keep them drill spinning.